All right, welcome to the executive team where we talk about leadership and inspiration behind the success of individuals, concepts, and other aspects of our lives that we can address not only in the business realm, but also in our personal lives. Today, we're going to be talking about the 80-20 rule. This is a book by Richard Koch. It looks like Koch, but it's Koch. But with that, we're excited to talk about it. There's a lot of these aspects, not only that benefit you on an individual scale, but also helping you make better leadership decisions, improve your personal life, things of that sort. And it's just a really exciting concept to go over.
I agree that it's the impact that it's had on various industries and on individuals' lives has been notable, and it goes back quite a ways to when this was originally founded. But we'll jump into that in a second. But I agree with Forrest. Very useful concept to apply in your business life and in your personal life.
Yeah, so Richard Koch is not the actual individual who invented this concept. It was made way before, but the general idea of the book, the premise of the 80-20 principle is that 80% of the results come from about 20% of the efforts. And this is, again, applied through various fields, including business, health, professional, productivity, and can be applied in most everything that we do, as long as we understand the concept and know how to apply it.
Yeah, so it starts with some people may know it as the Pareto principle. And so Pareto, basically this gentleman in France back in the day, and I'll start with this, I guess, too. We're not professionals in every aspect of these business concepts we're talking about or these ideas, but we have experience and a good understanding of how to apply and how we've utilized these in our professional careers and our personal lives. And so with that, we're just excited to discuss these things with you. So please feel free. We're not going to get everything right or maybe give you everything that you want. We love the idea of you sharing more in the comments if there are things you feel like we miss. So with that said, the Pareto principle, a gentleman in France, and I can't recall exactly which time period, but conceptually, he simply grew peas in his garden and realized that 20% of his plants were producing 80% of the product. And then he started to look at other aspects of life and realized the same thing. It had something to do, one of them had something to do with the percentage of land ownership. And it was either France or Italy. Now I feel like I'm saying that wrong. But ultimately, this gentleman from Europe had personal experience in his garden and then started applying this to other areas, realizing that 20% of the people had 80% of the wealth in that nation. And the same thing applied to land, that 20% of land owners owned 80% of the land. And so this principle kind of applied across a lot of things. And then over time, more people like Richard Koch have realized that this applies in different ways as well.
So one thing that I thought was interesting, and he emphasizes it very clearly in the book, is that even though it's called the 80-20 principle, not everything is perfectly 80-20. Sometimes it's 80% comes from 10%. In some applications, it's actually 80% comes from 1%. There are many instances in like Salesforce. You might get an individual who boosts your entire business by himself or herself. And as a result, that number isn't necessarily 80-20, but the concept is kind of what we're going for, that you can get a majority that comes from the minority. And with that, there are many current organizations that are using this structure, and we have a couple instances here, not only from the book but outside of the book. One example is Microsoft. In their software development, a lot of their concepts come from what applications are used the most and how can we emphasize that those are going to be the most successful, like make sure that those are not only the most utilized but also that they cater to the audience that uses it the most. And so they've used that to great success, and as a result of them implementing it, there's a lot of organizations, software related, who have also done that. Another example is Google, when it comes to analyzing user engagement and the metrics that are used across all of their products. They prioritize refining their algorithms and better understanding the features that drive the highest usage. And as a result, they see that a ton of the usage of their products or services are used within just a few. The majority of the audience uses just a few of their aspects. And as you can see, they've highly refined their algorithm to support that as well. Another one is Amazon. When it comes to their catalog systems and how they will put things in front of individuals, a lot of their inventory, it's a small amount of their inventory, which is taken by a huge majority of their audience, their customer base. But in that was one concept that they address in the book, and I thought this was fascinating, is even though 20% of the products are used by 80% of the customer base, and that the majority of their audience caters to such a small section, if they cut out the rest of it, it actually does worse for their business. You get that idea that if you have 2 options, it's easier to make a decision if you have 20 options. But when it comes in the sense of you have products in front of you, if you have 100 options, they've found, especially specifically through Amazon, that even though there's 100 products, they still do best if there is 100 products, even though 20 of those products are used instead of that full 100. So it was an interesting concept that even though the concept is saying try to cater to that 20% that's actually being utilize and emphasize that minority, you still need to potentially have much more, depending on your field. You still need to support those employees that produce that other 80%. You don't want to just make a terrible work-life balance, or not only for them work-life balance, but a atmosphere in your company, or the culture of your company. You want to make sure that everyone's supported, but recognize that there's a 20% that provides 80% of the results there.
I think that's interesting as you're bringing up the Amazon aspect of it. So, for example, if you're a seller, I can't imagine being a seller and my product being excluded from a search because these 20 sell much better than yours. Mm-hmm. So you're simply not going to share my product. So my input provides no output for you, a minimal output for you. So you give it no output in terms of the options or advertising. So there's something to be said about the importance of recognizing the whole, the value of the whole, while focusing as best you can on the most productive products and services.
Yeah, because you're still addressing that 20% that isn't, that 80% technically that's not doing very well, but they're only potentially providing 20% to you. But if you were told that you could make an extra 20% on your income or your revenue, I mean, you're going to do it as long as it doesn't require a ton of effort. Again, your emphasis is on that 20% producing that 80%.
So if I can jump into a personal example, I worked for a financial institution, and the lenders were really I don't know, maybe the cool kids in the building. But basically, these lenders, a large part of what they're doing is helping us find clients to borrow funds, which really is ultimately what drives revenue for the financial institution. Now, what we found oftentimes is they would butt heads with other departments or other areas. Why does accounting care how I record this, how I note that? Why is marketing so concerned that I say it this way and not that way? You could almost look at marketing and accounting and these supplemental or supporting departments as that 80% that's still essential, but the focus really was getting the sales team or our lenders the resources and tools they needed to be most successful. Now, part of that was supporting the other parts of the organization, and with that said, a good organization is going to be able to properly allocate resources, energy, time, and focus on the 20% without eliminating or forgetting about the other supporting elements.
Yeah, because again, if you abandon the supporting elements, you may see that you're just everything just collapses as a result. Even though they're not providing as much, they are essential.
Well, and as much, so this is relative. So my wife's an accountant, so I bring this up as an example. I think you could look at accounting and be like, all of this is stupid. Keeping track of these things the way we do is a waste of my time. I'm a salesperson, whatever it might be. I drive revenue. I don't worry about keeping track of every little expense. But the government cares. And so because of that, you have to give it the time and attention it deserves. While accounting may be boring to many, it's essential to an organization to strive and to succeed. And this works and applies in principles in your own life. If you pay no attention to your bank account, you are bound to have financial problems in the future. With that said, I'm not going to spend forever looking at every little expense that I have, but I am going to be thinking about that. That's something that I am going to have in my mind.
Yeah, and that's there's another aspect to address in that as well, in the sense that, let's just say 20% of your customer base is providing 80% of your revenue. You still have the opportunity to make your audience or your customer base bigger. And so if you're just focusing on the current 20% that are providing that 80%, you could potentially decreasing the size or the volume that is coming in as a result of not catering to everyone else, even though they're not providing as much. Again, you emphasize the 20, you don't solely focus on, because I feel like that becomes the destructive aspect.
Yeah, and so I'm thinking of Amazon as you're saying that, in its early days. So when Amazon was introduced, Jeff Bezos had this brilliant idea of a digital library. Tell that to Barnes and Noble back in the 1990s. Tell that to what was the other, Border Books? A lot of these big organizations that were just like that. Not everybody has a computer, and nobody wants to sit in front of a computer and read a book. Well, as technology evolved, how many physical books are purchased relative to digital books? It's extremely different. Mm-hmm. So at that time, in the 90s, the digital or online portion was very low sales volume, but he saw the potential for the future. Mm-hmm. So a smart organization is not going to maintain a fixed 80-20 mindset for current products and services. They're going to recognize that can evolve over time.
Evolving businesses are the businesses that, I mean, if you're going to adapt to the market, you're more likely to be successful. If you're stagnant, we have perfect examples of this, then you're not going to survive. We have two companies that went against each other. One was tiny, one was big. Blockbuster against Netflix. When Blockbuster came in, they were that bookshop. They were the ones who were like, oh yeah, no, this is what people want. Not everyone has a device capable of streaming. Not everyone has internet. Not everyone wants to be able to just, well, I guess initially Netflix was ship a disc to you, and you kind of
no late fees.
Going from there, no late fee. Yeah. And that concept worked for both of them at a period of time. Blockbuster even had the opportunity to buy Netflix, and they didn't end up following through with it because they didn't see it being worth it, because Netflix thought they were worth more. And as we know now, Netflix is kind of a powerhouse because they adapted to the market. Not only were they a more convenient option with shipping discs at the beginning, but then when they adapted to being a shipping disc and to be virtual, or I guess online streaming, and now it's completely online streaming, they've adapted to the market, and as a result they've found success. Well, Blockbuster continued to think that, oh no, there's always going to be people who want to come in and drive in, and that's technically true, but then we got like Redbox who kind of took over that concept, where if you want a movie and you want to do a disc, you just go to a Redbox, see that they have 100 options available, but pick one of those and then you just return it, and if you don't, you get some fees on there. But it's just the concept you have to be willing to adapt to be able to see that the 80-20 principle pretty much applies all the time, but that doesn't mean it doesn't change in how it's applied.
Yeah, I think it is the mindset shift that has to occur. You have to be thinking about what the future looks like when you're doing this. I don't know if we're at a spot where I can give another example. Sure. So in my professional experience as a project manager, I give this example stands out in my mind, that there are certain levels of control given at certain tiers within an organization. Executives have the ability to make different decisions than people on the ground floor. As a project manager, I may have multiple projects that have differing levels of priority from different departments within an organization. Now, what we'd find is that one department would say, this is absolutely essential, that this is done by this time frame. But we're getting different direction from the executive team saying, give the sales team their software and have it functioning the way they expect before we do this for accounting. As a project manager, I had to understand how to make that shift, for those priority shifts. So one, leadership was generally going to convey this information to both departments. Sometimes they didn't, and they had us kind of be the front man. And what that meant was I would go to, say, accounting and say, we know that your contract ends with this software company and we have to transition you over by this timeline. However, the organization as a whole has higher priorities. So we need to find a way to get a temporary contract in place to allow you to continue to use this software for 3 more months while we finish these projects, and then bring yours to the forefront. So that was a lot of project management, was good communication, helping people understand priorities and not demeaning when somebody says, like, hey, our contract is literally going to end for this software. We will not be able to run our financial institution from the accounting department if we don't have this in place. So my goal is to help them, or was to help them as a project manager, make those changes, get those contracts in place, and then get things set up in a way that we could keep things moving as an organization and reprioritize things. It was also my job to convey properly to the executive team what the accounting team felt was important. So the 80-20 rule here was not simply giving, again, 20% to, say, the lenders, the people who are making the money for the organization, and then ignoring everyone else. I still had to reallocate and move people in and out of that 20%. And one of the examples you mentioned earlier with Microsoft, so because a large part of what I did in project management was software development, with Microsoft, prioritizing things. One of the things, I want to say it was mentioned in the book, I've also just done a lot of research on this rule and this principle outside of the book, but was conceptually that if a help desk had received so many tickets for bugs or defects within software, something's not working within this application, and they kept getting all these reports, well, 20% of the reports they were getting, what they would find is that this top 20%, the ones that got the biggest, we get 100 people telling us they have a problem, 20 of them are in this area. What we'd find is that those were the most pertinent or important ones to address. So if you addressed those 20, you actually addressed 80% of the problems by addressing that small category. Now, I don't know how much sense that makes for anybody outside of the software world, but that principle really did apply there, that we would focus on the things that really were the most difficult to work with. If somebody couldn't see something on a page versus somebody couldn't do something that had to be done on another page, one became more important. This one can't even do anything. This one's only missing part of the information. So we had to work on the priority first, and ultimately, by fixing what didn't work here, it sometimes fixed some of the other things down the line too. So that 80-20 rule worked both in software development and project management for myself.
Yeah, and I worked for a large technological company before, and in that time working for them, whenever issues were reported, it tended to follow that rule more or less as well. Let's just say there were 100 problems reported. Well, 20 of those problems affected 80% of the audience or the customer base. And as a result, if they solved those 20 problems, they relieved issues on 80% of the issues that were being reported. So it has its own effect that has much more of an effect than we realize. Targeting those major aspects can relieve a lot of the stress, a lot more stress than we realize, as long as we have the understanding of how the rule is applied. But again, this concept requires a mind shift, for sure, a mindset shift, in that we can see that we might be looking at the whole picture in a leadership realm, whether that be, again, in a manager position, a director, a owner position. We need to recognize that sometimes less is more. And in the less is more concept, there can be some issues that, if resolved, will relieve your stress way more than resolving the ones that may take just a couple minutes, but they are still issues that have arisen. With that, there are some organizations that have utilized this less is more concept very, very well. One of them is, not only on a software aspect, but also on a hardware aspect, Apple. Apple not only focused on the less is more in the sense that they decided that providing fewer products would benefit more as a whole. So for example, if you compare a competitor to Apple, Samsung has, they have washers and dryers, they have TVs, they have speakers, they make, they make a ton of stuff actually. Whereas Apple has focused primarily on the iPhone, iPad, the Mac, Apple Watch, things like that. They've tried to narrow down their product pool. As a result, they have seen a less is more turn into an actuality, in the sense of seeing a ton of support from their customer base, saying that they like that simplicity, even though in most people's eyes you would think that, the more options you have, the better. But again, it doesn't address everyone's needs. So Apple has this idea that the user interface can be simple, and that addresses 80% of the population, while there are some people who really like Android because you can customize everything. Yeah. But again, you might actually be outside of that 20% if your idea is that you want to be able to adjust everything. Because if you find an 80-year-old, they're like, no, I just want to know exactly where the speed dial is to call my granddaughter, things like that. They don't need that. They don't have the time for it, and they don't feel like they need to understand it, which could actually be totally true in their eyes. So keeping that understand that less is more, simplicity can be a benefit to your organization or to your position in the sense of if you're in leadership or not. But it also works in a marketing strategy. So let's just say you're an owner of a construction organization and you know that your customer base tends to be more rural than in city. You would know more of who to address it. But if you're just going to pay for that, all those marketing fees for everybody, you're going to recognize that a lot of it is kind of being wasted. You might want to spend something on it again because you still want to address that 80% that isn't producing really anything. That 80% is only producing 20%, but that 20% that's producing that 80%, you want to make sure that you're isolating them and making sure that your marketing strategy is addressing them. And again, that is kind of how Apple did it as well, where they highlighted a single product or feature that they know that it might be 20% of the features, but it's what 80% of people want. And so as a result, those 80% of people might buy the device specifically for that reason. And that's when we kind of see that mindset shift to less is more can be applied in multiple aspects. And again, it doesn't have to be in a corporate job. I mean, blue collar, we see it addressed all the time in less is more, but there are many ways to put in this 20-80 principle, this 80-20 principle in pretty much every aspect of your life.
Yeah, and so looking at it from a personal life perspective, so kind of transitioning from technology into your personal life, this principle, think about this from your own perspective for a second. How many of the apps that you have downloaded on your personal cell phone do you utilize on a daily basis? Or with any level of frequency? Now, odds are, if you did the math, statistically the way it would play out, you use 20% of the apps on your phone with any level of frequency. And the other 80% you're not using all the time. However, every once in a while you might want to check on your sports team because say it's off season, so you're not actually using that app outside of the season. There are lots of reasons for that, and kind of going into how else this applies in your personal life is that you may find that 20% of the relationships that you have are the ones that bring you the most joy, that are the most fulfilling. And so focusing on that 20% is much more valuable than focusing on the 80 that exists out there. So for example, you might have neighbors you don't connect with as often. You may have coworkers you don't spend as much time with. But when you're in situations where you're driving down the road, you will wave to that neighbor. You're at work, you're going to communicate with those coworkers. But you may find that outside of work, you don't necessarily interact with that person. Or outside of neighborhood activities, you're not really interacting with that person. I know some people may feel bad about that, or, oh, I should have been there for them in this situation. It's difficult to manage personal life, professional life, and everything in life. So understanding the 80-20 rule and what it does for you, your family, and your loved ones is focusing on the things that bring you the most happiness, the most joy. If spending time with your family is one of your priorities, make sure you're giving it more of your time. Make sure that you're not cutting things short that actually add value. If you enjoy reading just for the entertainment aspect of it, give it its proper time. If you're reading self-help books, if you're just reading for fun, if you enjoy sci-fi, whatever it might be, give yourself accept that you won't be able to give yourself to everything in the world because it's not possible for us to be in more than one place at a time, right? Give yourself the opportunity to focus on the relationships, on the activities, and on the events that mean the most to you, and accept that you're not necessarily going to be able to be there for the other 80% at all times. And again, it's a time for everything and everything in its time. So again, you're at work, you're not necessarily thinking about the barbecue this weekend. However, you may be. But ultimately, you're focused on your relationships and the things that you're doing there. So in your personal life, there are very many ways that you can look at this as well. So again, ensuring that your relationships, your time, your energy is being focused on the things that really bring about both the most joy and most productivity in your personal life.
So another aspect, he does go into your health, your personal health. And this is something that, I've highly focused on my health. I've recognized. I try to make sure that I am addressing like whatever vitamins I need, just because I find that myself deficient in some areas. And exercise might be something I'm focusing on because I'm like, oh, this part of my body I'd like to build up because I feel like it's just too small or it's not strong enough. I feel like the 80-20 principle it very much applies in this aspect as well, to where you might see that you might find a certain exercise uncomfortable, so you do a different exercise that makes you feel comfortable. I'm not referring to something that's going to tweak your shoulder. I'm referring to an exercise that is just so straining it makes you slightly more uncomfortable.
Do you skip leg day?
I actually tripled my leg day. Okay,
I think leg day is a great example of how people ignore one thing.
It may be their need.
On another.
Yeah, they may have a need, but they're not addressing it necessarily. But in that aspect, 80% of your progress comes from 20% of the things that you would normally do. So there might be an exercise that you absolutely hate because, okay, a perfect example, leg day, Brazilian split squats.
I hate them.
You do that, you will feel like you're going to pass out. You feel like you're going to black out. But that exercise will annihilate your legs, and as long as you eat correctly, again, eating correctly can also come into your 80-20 principle, making sure that you're eating correctly. But that concept, it makes you very uncomfortable because it annihilates like your lungs, your like blood flow is just redirected so much to your lower body that you'll feel lightheaded, things like that. But the progress that you'll get from that is insane. But people, because it's so difficult, will reallocate their time at the gym, or their time, whether that gym's in your garage, you have to just do weighted exercise that can't have too much strain, whatever your situation is. But you can recognize that the things that make you uncomfortable tend to be the things that make you gain the most progress, because if you're never uncomfortable, you probably don't have a whole lot of progress. If you're just walking on the treadmill for 10 minutes and then going to the sauna, you're probably not going to be in as fit a shape as someone who allocated most of their time to something that raised their heart rate to over 140, 160, and you see that they're super fit, and you're like, oh, why can't I get like that? Well, there's two aspects of that, the gym and your eating habits, but you got to recognize that, again, the 80-20 principle is applied to this as well.
Yeah, and I think if 20% of the food you're taking in is what your body is relying on for health and development, you're going to start having health problems. So I think that's a good example. More than 20% of what you eat should be giving you the nutrients your body needs. So kind of look at what calories you're taking in, what food you're taking in, again, kind of from a personal level, and recognize where you should be focusing. Should you be taking in more vegetables? Should you be taking in more fruit? Should you be exercising more often? These things bring balance in our lives.
Yeah. And sometimes exercising more often is not the option. It's not the actual, the issue at hand. Sometimes it's eating. Actually, more than not, it's the eating is the issue.
Man.
Especially in the United States. I've visited other countries, and they just don't have the issue with the food as much. They might not be exercising, and that might be why they're not necessarily in as good a shape. But in the U.S., I've definitely seen that the eating habits, you can just see that the unhealthy food is cheaper than the healthy food, and so it's hard to justify. But if you can get your mindset set on this whole 80-20 concept, you'll see that 80% of your progress starts to form you into the person you want to be. Again, this in business, you could see that if you focus on it in your business, in your position, whether you are the person who makes the decisions or you're the person who takes the decisions from corporate and you're applying them, how you apply them, how you allocate your energy can significantly change not only your work-life balance, the culture of the organization, your happiness. You can completely flip everything if you understand that your allocation of time, what your priority should be, how you take advantage of that understanding can really just alter everything that you've got going on currently. Again, personal life, business, fitness, whatever it may be.
Yeah, with a lot of this, we're interested in getting more of your feedback, whether it be in comments or wanting to connect with us in some other way. So we'd love to share any thoughts that you feel like we didn't discuss or didn't touch on at this time. And we want to ensure that not only your voice is heard, but that we're filling in the voids that kind of occur naturally as we go through some of these points. So please share things in the comments and then reach out to us if you have other points you think we should make.
Yeah, and if you haven't already, this book is great. Go ahead and take a read at it. They got they have an audio book for it, Audible, Apple Books, whatever you use. But the physical book is nice because if you see a phrase in there that you really like, you can highlight it, write it down, whatever you want to do there. But what are your thoughts on the 80-20 rule? What do you feel like you can apply it to your work, your life, your health? Do you feel like this concept of simplicity can actually be a strength, is something that can be applied to your lifestyle? Do you feel that these principles help you improve your ability to lead, your ability to be a better person, to make decisions, things of that sort? Like reflecting on your daily activities, can you identify 20% of your tasks and commitments that yield 80% of your satisfaction on a personal level, on a work level? Can you identify that 20%? Because again, sometimes it requires some digging, but if you can identify that 20%, you'll recognize that things become a lot easier.
Yeah. Thinking about relationships again as well, consider the relationships in your life and where you're spending your time and where you're getting the most value and giving the most value. I don't want to pretend that relationships are a one-sided thing. They're very much mutual. So if you find that you uplift certain people around you and these people also uplift and encourage you, are you focusing on those relationships? Are you spending time with the people that you really want to define you and your personality?
But yeah, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on this concept? Have you seen it applied? If you hear this and then want to apply it, let us know what the results are. We'd love to hear it. We're here to learn together. I mean, we're not always going to address everything perfectly. So if you feel like you have something to add, please put it in the comments. Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to see you next week. Next week, we will be reviewing the Johari window. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly. Johari window concept, and how that has impacted leadership and inspiration over the years. We're excited to talk about it. Don't forget to tune in. It's going to be a really good one. We've done our own fair of studying so far, but we've got a lot to do until we have that episode. But we're excited to talk about it. We'll see you next week.